So it's Sandy Petersen yet again, and now we're going to talk about the Storm Empire in the Gods' War. First, a little anecdote. A couple months ago, I was showing off Gods' War at a small convention in California, and Ken Ralston, a well-known game designer, he worked on Oblivion, for example, came over and he said, I want to play the game. He's no Grant the Hand like I am, and he wanted to see what it was like. So he sat and I said, okay, here you go, Ken. Now, Ken's mostly an RPG designer, not so much board games, so he was like, he felt he'd be a little bit at sea, so he took the Storm faction, and I didn't watch the gameplay, but the next morning he said, so Sandy, I played your game. I said, well, I hope you liked it. And he said, I didn't know how to play Storm, because I had nothing to base my theory on, so I just acted the way I perceived Orlanth, the Storm God, to be. So like a big dumb bully, heedless of consequence, go in there and fight. And I said, really? And he said, yes. I said, how'd it work? He said, I won. So he was thrilled by the fact that when he role-played the Storm God, he won in the game. And in general, that's the goal I've had for all of the factions, and you'll see how it works when you play it. Darkness as the scavenger, the guy stab in the back. Chaos as wild destruction. The Sun God as the passive-aggressive ruler, kind of snotty, looking down on the others and making them work for him. And Storm, the bully. Let's talk about Storm. So Storm's unique ability is inferiority complex. One of my players thinks it's really funny that their bonus ability is called that, but what it works is, during the power phase, you can choose to give up two victory points and get 4 power. So generally you can't do this the first turn, but starting with the second turn, you can trade in 2 power, get 4 VP a turn. Now obviously you're hoping to get at least 2 victory points out of that 4 power, but quite often you can do it. In fact, if all you did was boringly place 3 shrines with that 4 power, you'd be 1 up on victory points, then you have a power to spare. So it's a really useful ability. You don't have to do it every turn, but it's generally really handy for you. Now his other ability is, his weakness rather, is called Honor. And the Honor is an ongoing ability. What it is if other players are out of power, then it costs you 2 power to declare battle against them. And this is a pretty staggering weakness, because most empires, like one of the major tactics of God's War, as well as of my earlier game Cthulhu Wars, is wait till the other players are out of power and then go and rampage among them and kill them. Well, if the Storm God does that, then it costs him 2 power to attack them, so it's extra. He has to pay this surcharge to attack a guy who's down. And what this means, of course, is that Storm has to operate a little differently from other factions. Most factions, they spend the early part of the game building up the infrastructure, getting units, then the last part of the turn is they're going around trying to attack guys. Storm has to front load his attacks and spend the second half of his turn placing buildings and getting new units and preparing for next turn. So he's kind of 1 step off, out of step with the other factions. And this can be, if he gets this right, it can be a really big advantage, and if he bungles it, then of course it can hurt him. But the idea is that you get it right, and then you're all awesome. And then, of course, the fact that you're attacking them early when they aren't really ready for it means they're off put too, and they're spending time trying to recover from what you've done to them and doing. Anyway, that's kind of how it goes. So, onto their buildings. They have shrines, temples, and ziggurats, like the average faction, and their temples and ziggurats have the ability that if you start at a temple or ziggurat and you move from it, Storm only, not other people, you can skip an intervening area and go 2 areas out, which is very useful. Now you can't use the travel arrows over the ocean when you're doing that, because in theory you're like flying or leaping or something, so you can't ride a boat while you're jumping, right? So that's the idea, but it's still really useful. As one example, let's say you are in the Enmal Mountains on the far south side of the map, which I'm hoping there's a picture here right now. You can skip an area. So the area you can skip is the whole Sky Dome, which is just 1 area, and you can pop out in Altadella on the other side of the world. That's a pretty long reach for a unit to go, and it saves you power and movement, which is very handy. Now, their units. They have 4 barbarians, cost 1, combat 1, everyone's got those. Their champion, which costs 2, and normally has a combat of 2, but we'll get into what they're like. He might be the very best, one of the best heroes in the game from combat purposes, and we'll talk about how that works. Then he has 3 lesser gods, the Storm Brothers, And finally, he has his greater god, the Thunder King. Now, the Thunder Kings costs 4, and your Templar Ziggurat has to be in play. This is a common requirement for greater gods. And his combat ability is equal to your gifts. So you always have at least 1 because you get a gift when you summon him. But if you have more than 1, you can go up to 6 and have a 6 combat. This is pretty big for God's War. So he's an imposing guy, and his special ability is called Kinship, and it kicks in during the council phase. And what happens is you pick another faction in the game, another empire, any other player you want, to receive either 2 power or a victory point. And then, after they get that, you get whatever the reward is you didn't give them. So for example, you could say, I'm picking Darkness to get a victory point. That means you get 2 power. Or you can say, Chaos is going to have 2 power, then you get a victory point. So basically each turn, you're boosting some other empire, typically someone lagging behind, but not always, and then you're giving yourself a reward. So you pick the reward. Anyway, the Sun God's really, the Thunder King's really useful and handy to have just for that alone. Plus he has the combat ability, plus there's a gift associated to 2 gifts that he has that are really good. So now we'll go into, well, not into the gifts yet. First, how you get the gifts, your hero quests. Now, Sun God's hero quests are slower to get than the other factions. Quite often, he's the last player to get all 6 gifts. However, since all of his gifts except for 1 are about movement or combat, that probably works out better for the other players. Now, here's the gift. So first, he has to kill an enemy mortal in battle. Now, this has a pleasing balance with Darkness's gift of wanting to lose an enemy unit in battle, their own unit in battle. So quite often it's an arrangement between Darkness, not an arrangement, but at some point Darkness is trying to attack Sky to get to kill a Sky unit, not Sky, Storm, to get a Storm unit for their big gift, and you're trying to kill one of the Darkness guys so you can kill a unit, and they don't care if they get killed because they want to have a guy die for their gift, so kind of all works out together for everyone. Okay. You have the gift. Now, of course, it's just kill an immortal. It doesn't have to be a minion. You could kill a hero, but generally it's a mortal that you've killed. So your next gift is kill an enemy god. Now, it could be a greater god, but usually it's a lesser god, and killing that god gives you a gift. This takes a little longer to do because enemy lesser gods don't come out till later, enemy greater gods don't come out till later, and in general, gods are harder to... Okay, they also have the gift of placing their ziggurat, like every faction with a ziggurat, and they get the gift of placing their greater god, like every faction except for the Sky faction with placing their god. Finally, they get a gift when at least 2 other players have runes. So you have to keep an eye on the other players and check when they get runes. Typically, there'll be a point where the 2 of them have runes. Sometimes one of them will kind of betray you because he'll get a rune, then quick spend it before someone else gets one. But generally, by 2 or 3 turns into the game, 2 of them have runes at the same time, and that gift appears. The last hero quest is another player has to have 6 gifts. Because of this requirement, Storm is never the guy to get all his gifts first, because at least one other guy has to have 6 gifts. So of course you can get him quite close after him, because as soon as he gets 6, you get your 6. But you really have to wait for that one, so you're kind of looking around, seeing where people are. And of course you can use Kinship, because that gifts other players as a tool to help bring that about. If you see someone that needs to get the gift, you may not want to use that on someone that's way ahead, of course, but there it is. Okay, we are now going to talk about Storm's gifts. First, we're going to talk about the only gift they have, which is not movement or combat related, and it's called Weather Control. And what happens is this gift is 1 use, and the moment you get this gift, you immediately put it face down and never use it again. But when you do that, you earn 1 power for each gift you currently have, including Weather Control, plus you get a rune. So this gives you a big boost in power. Now, a lot of people assume what they should do is wait until and use it as their last gift and then get 6 power near the end of the game. But if you think about it, you might be better off getting a gift of 4, 3, or even 2 power earlier in the game and get that early rune than wait till the end of the game and get 6 when kind of the die has already been cast and you see how things are going. So you can judge when this goes and place it at the right time. If you are getting the gift near the end of your turn, then of course it's like a big boost at the end. Of course then they have to worry about your honor ability. Do I want to use the gift to attack them paying 2 each? to pay that surcharge, or should I use it to place a whole bunch of temples? You know, it's up to you. But it is a really useful one-time big surge in the game that gives you a boost. Okay, next you have your insurgency ability, and this is a combat ability. It actually happens during the conquest phase. What it lets you do is when you conquer an enemy building, you can always replace it with one of your temples if you have one in your stock. So it doesn't matter if the enemy building is a chaos nest or a shrine or a ziggurat, you can always replace it. This is extremely useful. And as a result, typically by the time you start to go on your storm rampage around the world, you kind of want to set things up so that your only buildings are shrines and your ziggurat. So for example, most players will build shrines, then they build a temple, then they build another temple, then they build one of those up to a ziggurat, then they got all three kinds of buildings. What Storm typically does, it builds a shrines, then it builds a temple, then it builds that one temple up to a ziggurat, and then it starts attacking that turn. And when it conquers someone else, it conquers them, turns them into a temple. And so then it's placed in these temples by conquest, and it saves them power, and it makes them more effective, and it's really, really useful. Now we're going to talk about the 4 other combat movement gifts the Storm gets. So one of them is single combat. This is their hero's gift. And what happens is that when you apply this, you have a choice. Now, one thing you can do is you can have your hero roll 3 dice instead of 2. That's obviously always useful, okay? But the other option, which is more often chosen, is that your hero gets to attack first. Before anyone else rolls dice, first the hero does his attack and inflicts any casualties, and then the rest of the units roll dice. So if the hero gets a kill or a pain, those enemy units are removed from the area, and then whatever's left of his guys fights the rest of the units. So obviously hitting them first, getting their first strike capacity is extremely handy and makes your hero very effective in combat. Plus, now the reason you may want to roll 3 dice instead of the first strike is because early in the game you're trying to kill an enemy unit or an enemy god to get those gifts, and rolling 3 dice might be better for that purpose, give you one more chance to roll a 6. So early in the game you often do the 3 dice. Later in the game you almost always are going for the first strike ability. Okay. Then there is the whirlwind ability. This is associated with the Storm Brothers, your lesser gods. And what it does is when a battle is declared in an area against you or by you, you can move any or all of your Storm Brothers from wherever they are on the map into the area. They just teleport right in. Okay, players of Cthulhu Wars have been recognized as similar to the seek and destroy option of the hunting horrors. However, there's another bonus in it, because if you use Whirlwind at all, then you also get to roll an extra die in combat. Now that's not per Storm Brother, that's just total. So if you move 2 Storm Brothers in, you still only get 1 extra die. But if you move 1 Storm Brother in, then you get 1 extra die. That means in effect that Storm Brother's added 2 dice to you, which is 2 dice for a 2-cost creature. So, you know, that's pretty sweet. One of the results of this is typically Storm scatters the Storm Brothers around about the map. It doesn't want to have them in his main battle group because he wants them to Whirlwind in and add that die. Which makes his barbarians very important for his attack force because he doesn't want to move with his Storm Brothers. He's got 2 other gifts, and these both are tied to the Thunder King. The first is teleport. Now teleport is an action that costs 1 or 2, and we'll get into why that is in a second. But it lets you take the Storm King, the Thunder King, and move him to anywhere in the universe along with one other unit from the area. Now, that other unit could be your unit, or it could be an enemy unit. So you can use it to drag someone away from where they are, which often they hate. Now, if you use this ability to move out of hell without permission, or to move an enemy god, or both, then it costs 2 power. Otherwise, it costs 1 power. So if you want to drag for example, let's say you are in the same area with the sun god and you want to drag him to hell because you want to punk him, then it costs 2 power because it was an enemy god. And that's teleport. Or quite often you use it to move the storm god along with like your champion or something somewhere interesting so you can get an attack off. But you can use it for anything else. You can use it to strip enemies away. You can reshuffle their units. It's just generally a good thing to be able to teleport around the map. And this adds to your otherwise already really good combat options of whirlwind and the fact that your temples let you jump an area. So it just you really can strike almost anywhere on the map and you're really, really lethal. Now, of course, Darkness can kind of do this with their Hellborn ability, but it takes them 2 rounds to do it. You can do it right away, so you are a little more effective than Darkness in that regard. As is fit, because you're the god of the wind and the storm and the airwaves and that kind of thing. Okay, your final ability is called Courage. And this is if Thunder King goes into battle against an enemy group that has a combat of 3 or more, then after the battle you get a rune. And it doesn't matter if Thunder King survives the battle, it doesn't matter if they rolled all their 3 combat dice, it just matters that they had the 3 combat went into fight. So for example, if you're going to combat against, say, Sky, and he's got the Emperor and a one archer, that's 3 combat. Even if he then uses his arrogance ability to blank out the Emperor so he only rolls 1 die, doesn't matter. He had 3 combat going in, you're getting a rune, which is what you want. Now, a lot of factions have some ability that kind of gives them 1 rune a turn, kind of as an ongoing thing, and that's a handy thing to have. But with Courage, if you can find strong enemy forces, you can get multiple runes a turn at a cost really of only 2 power each. Move, fight, move, fight, move, fight, each time you're getting a rune. The hard part is finding groups of enemies that have combats of 3. But of course there is a silver lining, which is if the enemy is like scattered in groups where their combat's only 2 or less, then they're all really weak and you can conquer their buildings, and it kind of makes up for not getting a rune because you're able to go pick on them and destroy them. So whether they bulk up to fight against you or they scatter their forces, you're in good shape. And that is some details about how to play Storm.